Discarded and laughed at, this homeless veteran revealed his amazing past as an automobile legend. Jim sat against the cold brick wall, a tattered blanket draped over his shoulders, feeling the sting of the city's relentless gaze. People rushed by, their laughter and chatter echoing like distant train whistles, far removed from his isolated world. He felt the scornful looks, the whispers behind cupped hands. Just another unfortunate soul, they thought. But they didn't know the dreams that once spun through his mind, painting brilliant lines on sheets of graph paper, illuminating the future of automotive innovation. He was Jim Sinclair, a name once lauded in the halls of the biggest automotive shows, a genius reduced to a shadow, overlooked and forgotten. As he flipped through the weathered pages of his notebook, the corners frayed and stained, the memories rushed back, designs of cars that turned heads, ideas that merged both beauty and function. His heart ached as each sketch sparked pieces of his former self, those moments of triumph overshadowed by the abyss of loss. He had lost everything: his family, his passion, and ultimately himself. An iconic car that embodied resilience lingered in his thoughts, but sharing it with the world felt impossible now that he hesitated with a heavy heart, torn between the longing to revive the spark of creativity and the fear that his past would bring ridicule rather than respect. What if revealing himself only fueled the explosions of delight that crushed him deeper? Lying here, anonymity felt safer, a comfortable blanket draped over the reality of near-total isolation. But a whisper of determination clashed within him. What if he dared? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. A rustling broke his focus. Mia, a fresh-faced journalist, her presence bursting with life, intrigued him. She paused, her eyes flickering over his sketches with a spark he hadn't seen in years. Your designs are incredible. Why haven't you shown them to anyone? Her question struck him as a blade, sharp and direct. Jim's stomach knotted. The barriers of systemic neglect loomed large in his mind, a fortress built from the bricks of past failures and societal disdain that he contemplated whether sharing his story with Mia would be his redemption or another cruel twist of fate. A flicker of hope lit within him, yet iron chains of doubt anchored him to the cold ground. A familiar feeling began to surface. His need for validation wrestled with a profound fear of exposure. The days passed, the city churned around them as the auto show neared, a backdrop to their mutual quest. But the weight of expectation wrapped around Jim's heart, his ambitions tangled in frustration. Was he willing to risk everything again, vulnerable against the very system that had shattered him? As he prepared to let Mia in, doubt crept like winter's breath. Would revealing his talent help him reclaim his crumbling life, or would it deepen the existing scars of betrayal and rejection? This moment felt monumental, teetering on a precipice that made his breath shallow and uneven, each heartbeat echoing the uncertainty of their journey, and so they faced this twist of fate, with the stakes higher than ever. As shadows loomed closer, the city buzzed alive with dichotomies, the irony of automotive dreams captured but never realized, a haunting reminder of what lay ahead. Jim sat in the din of the city, heart hammering against the confines of his chest. The glow of the neon lights flickered just beyond his tattered blanket, illuminating fragments of hope and despair. With Mia's piercing gaze still lingering in his mind, he felt the weight of possibility pressing down upon him. The sketches in his notebook seemed to whisper, beckoning him to carve a path through the mire of his neglect, yet the walls he had built around himself were formidable. Memories of rejection and the echoes of laughter that had once detoured his aspirations wrapped around him like a vice. Should he risk unveiling the designs he had kept hidden for so long? When failure had once crushed him, what if his resurgence lit the match to ignite further mockery? Jim wrestled with those thoughts, each cramp in his stomach a reminder of the stakes involved. Mia's show of enthusiasm had reignited a flicker in him. He had spent years burying his talent and convincing himself that it wasn't worth the trouble. But her sincerity felt different. It pierced his defenses, asking not just if he would share his designs, but if he would dare to share himself. He knew this was more than merely showcasing drawings, it was about exposing the raw, unvarnished history of a man who had, against all odds, crafted a legacy. As the glow of dawn began to unfurl over the horizon, Jim sat cross-legged on the sidewalk, deliberating. Perhaps he needed to confront the demons of his past head-on. Pulling out the ragged notebook, he flipped through his designs, recalling every late night spent scribbling linear progressions of vehicles that disobeyed conventional design. Each curve and arc had been intended to stir the soul, merging function with a compelling beauty. But now, the reality of intent battled with a haunting self-doubt. Could this reflected talent be viewed as arrogance? Or was it a chance to reclaim his identity? Anxiety teetered precariously alongside fortitude. If he failed, what would that say about him? If he succeeded, would he still feel whole? Mia approached moments later, her notepad clutched tightly in hand. "I sense you're contemplating," she said, tilting her head slightly. "What is stopping you?" Struck by her presence, Jim felt the relentless reformulation of his resolve. "People don't care about a man like me," he replied begrudgingly. The bitter taste of vulnerability lingered on his tongue. "Maybe you'd be surprised," she countered, her words an anchor in the turbulent sea of self-doubt. "The auto show is not just about the cars. It's about the stories behind them." Jim swallowed hard, his heart racing. This was at the moment of pivoting his silent fears into whispered aspirations. But what about the ones he'd left behind? Those sentiments rose within him, they urged him to stand still instead of taking a leap into the unknown, but could there be rebirth amid exposure? The risk loomed, yet for the first time in years, excitement trickled into his veins. "Would you help me?" he asked abruptly, the rightness of the question leaving no room for hesitation. The weight of the world began to lift as Mia's smile widened, igniting a fire long thought extinguished. "Let us show them who Jim Sinclair really is," she affirmed. In this moment, Jim felt a shift and unshackling of sorts. It was a tentative step forward, yet the journey ahead would involve clawing through the tainted memories that ensnared him. He could almost taste the freedom that lay within risk. As they prepared for the auto show, the looming question remained: would his unveiling lead to restoration or merely force him into an even deeper abyss? With that sense of apprehension tightening around him, Jim prepared to embrace his destiny, unaware of the sharp turns lurking just beyond the horizon. The moment to confront the past approached, and as uncertainty settled over him like a dense fog, he felt an unyielding need to face whatever awaited him directly. Jim took a deep breath, the sounds of the bustling city providing an odd form of comfort. It was like stepping onto the edge of an abyss, poised to leap but tethered by the weight of years lost in shadows. Mia's burgeoning belief in him resonated persistently, urging him to embrace the artist he once was. She had quickly become more than an ally, she was a catalyst for transformation. They settled into a small cafe, its walls adorned with vibrant artwork. Jim's fingers traced the rim of a chipped coffee mug, his mind buzzing with a flurry of strategies. What would he say? How could he encapsulate not just his designs, but also the essence of who he was when he had once navigated the corridors of prestige? He needed to delve deeper, peel back the layers that had accumulated over years of self-doubt. Mia's notebook lay on the table, filled with the stories of unknown artists finding their footing. Their paths were riddled with failure, yet each narrative ended with a glimmer of success, a beacon of hope that beckoned Jim closer. What if I don't fit their mold? He mused aloud, his voice barely a whisper. Mia's gaze intensified. But who sets that mold? You have to define it for yourself. The world can be surprisingly adaptable. The thought clung to him, igniting the embers of his ambition. It was time to craft his own mold, to redefine not only his legacy but also his self-concept. In that moment, he realized that his designs were not simply blueprints, they were embodiments of his spirit. They reflected resilience, an echo of all the dreams he had dared to dream. Armed with this epiphany, Jim flipped open his notebook, the creases and pages imbued with the weight of his history. He examined each sketch with fresh eyes, determining which design spoke to him the most deeply. They were imbued with passion, a testament to his creative hunger that had once been stunted. As he worked through the sketches, Jim felt a burgeoning confidence. He wrote a few lines beside each design, deliberate words that narrated stories of inspiration behind each curve and line. Every phrase was a defiance against the rejection he'd felt. As he continued, Mia scrutinized his every move, nodding in encouragement or prodding him to dig even deeper. "You're more than your past failures, Jim. Embrace that," she urged. Emboldened, Jim began to envision his presentation. It reminded him of the nights he spent under dim light sketching triumphantly, his vision untainted by the bitterness of rejection that had marred his years. It was time to show the world not just what he could create, but who he had once aspired to be, the man who dared to design the impossible. However, the looming shadows of his past continued to gnaw at the edges of his newfound clarity. He remembered the voices that had once dismissed his dreams, their laughter imprinted in his mind like a curse. Could he really confront these ghosts? Would they still haunt him if he stepped into the light? But now, he was aware that absence of risk breeds stagnation. He had a chance to reclaim his identity, to stand tall and reunite with the artist and man he was destined to be. The excitement flowed through him, even as fear intertwined itself within his veins. The clock's rhythmic ticking pushed him forward, every second was a reminder of the need to act. As they finalized the sketches, the last pieces fell into place, each detail deliberate and powerful, but with finality came dread. What would happen if the response slipped beyond his control? What if the past he was eager to unveil was merely fodder for contempt? "Jim, are you ready for this?" Mia asked, her eyes piercing into his. It was time to acknowledge that no matter the outcome, his journey toward recovery and recognition had already begun. As he nodded slowly, the gravity of the moment settled around him. Just then, an unexpected message buzzed in his pocket, a notification that would alter his course entirely. Jim's breath caught as he pulled out his phone, facing the reality of his next step. The moment of truth had rushed to him sooner than anticipated. Jim's heart raced as he stared at the notification displayed on his phone. The sender was a familiar name from his past, one he hadn't anticipated hearing from again. It was Dan, a former colleague who had reached out after years of silence. The message was blunt, a simple request: "Need to talk. It's important." "It's him. Dan." Jim's voice shook slightly as he showed Mia the screen. Her brow furrowed in concern. "Isn't that the guy who—" "Yeah. The guy whose scorn blighted my early career," Jim cut in, the weight of nostalgia creeping into his tone. Memories surged, bringing with them the sting of inadequacy. Dan had never believed in Jim's vision, often ridiculing his ideas when they were looking to break into a competitive automotive industry. The essence of his past sucked the wind from his sails, but there was also an unexpected thread of intrigue. Why now? "Maybe he wants to make amends," Mia suggested, her voice level but laced with caution. "Or maybe he needs something." Reason swirled in Jim's head, battling against the tendrils of anxiety tightening around his chest. This could either be a chance for closure or a new source of agony, but standing idle felt insufferable. "Should I respond?" he murmured, glancing at Mia, seeking her validation. He was on the brink of reclaiming his identity, yet one message could beckon back shadows he wasn't fully prepared to confront. "Absolutely," she urged, determination bright in her eyes. "You can handle this." With a deep breath, Jim typed, "All right." "When and where?" Hitting send felt monumental, as if he were defying a specter that loomed larger with every retraction. "Now that you're connected, what's the plan?" "You could lay everything out about your designs, your visions," Mia encouraged, folding her arms, half leaning forward with palpable zeal. "This could be your moment." Jim nodded, allowing a flicker of certainty to course through him. As they resumed their sketches, Jim's focus sharpened. He let the plans bubble to the surface, words and designs intersecting in a fervent dance. The clock continued its relentless ticking in the background, but now it was a sound that urged him to hone in on clarity instead of dread. With each stroke of his pencil, shadows of doubt fended off by the power of his resolve. He envisioned Dan's face transforming from that of a critic into an audience, one that could witness his rebirth. It took a moment for Jim to realize he had unconsciously crossed the boundary between fear and opportunity. The sketches no longer felt like a means of capturing the past, they now represented the bridge to a future not yet written. He was a veteran of this domain, once tired and tattered, but now invigorated by purpose. Another buzz interrupted the silence, Dan's quick reply igniting a wave of emotions. Tomorrow at the old diner. 3 p.m. There it was, the invitation into a plot unresolved. Tomorrow, Jim echoed softly, heightened anticipation coiling in his stomach. Are you ready? Mia asked again, fixing her speculative gaze on him. He could feel the weight of their previous conversation returning, the unyielding notion that he needed to define this mold for himself first before Dan, before anyone else. I can't run from the ghosts any longer. If I want to create something lasting, I must confront my past. All of it. Mia smiled, her support unwavering. That's exactly the attitude you need. Whatever happens, own it. The conversation steered Jim toward thoughts that were hard to shake. Was he prepared to face Dan? What would he say about his designs, his failures, and what he learned? More importantly, how would he navigate the years of buried resentment as he stumbled across the remnants of his former self? As he prepared for those looming questions, the light flickered with the promise of an unforgiving reckoning. With each second that ticked closer to the following day, he felt tethered to the inevitable confrontation that awaited him. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of more than just a meeting, it would serve as the juncture where his past and present collided, promising transformation or turmoil. And with that promise curled at the edges of his mind, Jim knew he was building towards something monumental. The moment of truth wasn't just about facing Dan, it was about reclaiming the artist he had long since buried. Would he be ready to rise from the ashes of former derision? But deep down, another truth began to simmer. Was this path truly what he wanted, or merely a consolation for the lineage he wished to escape? The answers loomed as the shadows stretched across his consciousness, edging him closer to an uncertain future. The sunlight streamed into the room like a herald, illuminating a landscape of hastily scattered blueprints and empty coffee cups that bore witness to Jim's frenetic preparation. He had hardly slept, his mind a whirlpool of memories, aspirations, and questions he couldn't seem to resolve. The looming meeting hung over him like a storm cloud, and now, as he glanced at the clock, its hands felt heavy with expectation. Anxiety twisted in his gut, but there was also something else, an ember of determination ignited by the notion that this conversation would serve a purpose greater than just confronting Dan. It would offer him a platform, a chance to reclaim who he was and to showcase the progress he had made, even if it was against the backdrop of doubt. The rhythmic sound of his heartbeat echoed in his ears as he pulled out the latest design sketches from his desk drawer. Each stroke of the pencil, each note jotted down symbolized not just his ideas but his journey through adversity. This was more than automotive design, it was a testament to his resilience. As he studied the designs closely, an inner voice nudged him to remember the man he had been when he first started in the automotive industry, the hopeful rookie armed with dreams, only to be weighed down by criticism from Dan. It was then that he realized he was now an entirely different person, sculpted by experiences that had carved strength and perspective into his psyche. With every moment that slipped by, the uncertainty about what to expect gnawed at him. Would Dan's arrival resurrect that hurtful past, or would it offer vindication? Was Jim ready to confront the man who had once dismissed him so readily? The question lingered, pulsating at the edge of his consciousness. He took a deep breath, unlocking the door to his creative sanctuary. The air outside felt charged with the promise of change, making him aware that he was not just moving forward but stepping into the unknown. The diner, a place steeped in nostalgia and echoes of conversations shared, awaited him. Screw this, Jim whispered to himself, resolutely composing his posture. This is not just a meeting. This is my renaissance. As he arrived at the diner, a quaint building that was both familiar and alien, he felt a wave of nostalgia surge like a tidal wave crashing over him. He remembered the laughter shared amongst colleagues, the aroma of coffee mingling with hopes and dreams, now tinged with his past grievances. Entering, Jim scanned the room, his heart racing at the sight of Dan seated in a corner booth. The ambience swirled with chatter and clatter, but all he could focus on was the figure who had shaped so much of his professional landscape. Dan looked up, his expression a complex tapestry of recognition, calculation, and something that resembled regret. "Jim," Dan greeted him with a cautious tone, tempered by distance. "Thanks for coming." Underlining the air between them, an unspoken history lingered, one fraught with disappointment and old wounds. Jim held Dan's gaze, steadying himself against the powerful undercurrents of their shared past. This was the moment he had been anticipating, yet part of him felt like he was teetering on a precipice. "You requested to talk," Jim replied, trying to keep his tone neutral despite the tumult within. "Let us get to it." Dan's eyes darkened momentarily, as if considering the weight of the conversation. "I didn't think you'd actually show up." Every part of Jim's being wanted to take that as a dig, yet he refrained. "Why would I miss the chance to talk to you, after all these years?" His voice, now steadied by resolve, echoed the truth he was ready to confront. "I've been following your work," Dan admitted, shifting his body to face Jim more directly. "And I'm impressed." As he spoke, Jim caught a glimpse of the flickering unease in Dan's gaze. "Impressed enough to reconsider your past judgments?" Jim countered, shaping the conversation with the nuanced assertiveness he had developed. In this moment, everything felt charged. The air thickened with the gravity of unfulfilled expectations. And the weight of regrets. "I made mistakes," Dan said cautiously, his tone betraying a hint of humility. "When you first showed me your designs, I didn't see what I should have." The declaration cracked like thunder in Jim's mind. Was this Dan's way of apologizing, or merely a setup for another disappointment? He felt his defenses raise, but amid the hesitation and old scars, a new thought emerged: did he truly want to harbor a grudge against a man who might also be facing his ghosts? Each second pulsed with the possibility of relearning the dynamics that had once shackled him. Could this be a collaborative opportunity, a chance to fuel the drive that had once been sabotaged? As he prepared to respond, the cascading flood of realizations knocked the breath from him. The wheels in his mind began to turn. Who, exactly, was he now? Would he measure his worth against Dan's past derision or forge a new path forward? Before he could commit to an answer, Dan leaned closer, a glimmer of sincerity lighting his features. "I need your help with something significant, Jim." The words hung in the air, rife with anticipation. The meeting had shifted, the stakes rising higher than his discomfort. "Let us hear it," Jim replied, each syllable a stepping stone toward an unraveling revelation that awaited him and the chance to redefine himself. And just as the curiosity began to spark anew within him, leaving the past behind felt impossibly tantalizing. What exactly did Dan need? And would supporting him provide Jim with the closure or further validation he sought? Jim leaned in, an unquenchable spark of curiosity igniting in him. As Dan prepared to speak, the diner's noise blurred into a mere backdrop to the charged moment unfolding between them. The shadows of their past loomed but felt less suffocating, as if this conversation could, at last, forge a different path. "Lately, I've been working on a project," Dan began, his voice steady but laced with an underlying urgency that caught Jim's attention. "It's an electric vehicle, one that has the potential to change the industry standards. We need a solid design, something fresh, something visionary." Jim's pulse quickened. The prospect of being a part of a groundbreaking project felt both exhilarating and daunting. "And you want me to lead the design?" Dan nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not asking you to forget the past. I want you to channel it, every bit of it. Your designs have evolved, Jim, you have visions that are ready to translate into something transformative." His instincts wrestled with disbelief. Could this be genuine, or was it just smoke and mirrors? Somewhere deep within, a piece of him longed for recognition, a chance to stand on his own merit rather than in the shadow of previous failures. But doubt whispered, pushing against the walls he had built around himself. Why would Dan want him now, after years of belittlement? What's the catch? Jim asked, his tone wary but firm. No catch, Dan replied, a flicker of frustration softening his features. Just honesty. I recognize that I made a mistake and I'm ready to accept that I need your help to correct it. I've seen your progress, Jim, and I hope you see it too. As Dan spoke, Jim's mind flooded with memories of those early days, the enthusiasm he had harbored, the designs that had once seemed so alive, yet had ultimately been cast aside by criticism. Could he really harness that moment and transform it into something extraordinary now? What is it you envision? Jim asked, redirecting the focus as he cautiously embraced possibility. The conversation spiraled from there, with Dan detailing the vehicle's intended technological prowess and how Jim's designs could accentuate its envisioned place in the market. Their exchanges fluctuated between technical jargon and the reminiscing of shared aspirations from days gone by. The more Jim listened, the more he felt an unexpected resurgence of creativity stirring within him. Yet, even as he engaged with Dan's excitement, a part of Jim remained vigilant, aware of past wounds. It wasn't just about the designs, it was about regaining a sense of self, about asserting his worth in an industry that had once undervalued him. What's my role going to be? He pressed, boldness weaving into his query. I want you to lead the way, Jim. This is your chance to steer the project. I'll support you, but this vision needs to reflect your voice, your ideas. It's about creating something iconic, not just meeting a deadline or filling a position, Dan replied, sincerity anchoring his words. Jim felt a thrill coil in his chest. The old insecurities remained, but now they were mingling with something invigorating, the sense that he could rise to this challenge, ignited by a flicker of hope igniting his soul. I'll take it, he said, locking eyes with Dan. But I need the freedom to create, to truly express my vision. Done, Dan affirmed, a smile of relief breaching the tension between them. Let's change the narrative together. Just as the air amongst them began to feel lighter, infused with the potential for a new beginning, Jim remembered the shadows of their history, shadows that lingered, reminding him that this new partnership would require him to balance trust with caution. Would he be able to move past the hurt and forge a collaborative spirit with a man who had once reduced him to mere disappointment? Yet, the anticipation was electrifying, pushing him toward the next step in his career, a leap he had never imagined he would take so soon. As he considered the possibilities that lay ahead, a new question nestled into his thoughts: if this partnership could redefine his career, could it also redefine his relationship with the past? Or would old ghosts continue to haunt him, threatening to undermine his newfound confidence? With each passing moment, a resolve began to weave itself through him, solidifying the intensity of his determination. It was not just a professional ascent, it was a personal reclamation waiting to unfold. And with a final exchange of affirmations, Jim found himself grappling with a tantalizing dilemma: was he truly ready to dive into this world that once marginalized him? Or would the fear of revisiting old fractures hold him back from stepping into a future he had yearned for? The answers felt tantalizingly close, yet shrouded in ambiguity, reigniting his inner turmoil. The next day dawned with a heavy sense of expectation. Jim stood before his reflection, the glow of early light casting long shadows in his apartment. It was an unsettling mix of anxiety and exhilaration. Today was the day he would meet with Dan and the rest of the team to officially kickstart the electric vehicle project. Despite the sunlight flooding the room, Jim felt darkness creeping into his mind. Questions spiraled through him. What if he failed? What if this was another futile attempt, another staircase leading nowhere? He shook his head, trying to dismiss the doubts. He had to remember the fire Dan had ignited when they spoke, the flickers of enthusiasm that sparked in him. This was his chance to reclaim something vital. He pulled on a crisp button-down shirt, feeling the familiar fabric against his skin. It was a conscious decision. He wanted to project readiness, professionalism, and embodiment of the designer he aspired to be. The mirror reflected not just his external appearance, but the man he was choosing to become. Arriving at Dan's studio, the sight of bustling activity briefly overwhelmed him. Designers and engineers were huddled over sketches and blueprints, the air charged with creativity. Jim took a deep breath, allowing the energy of the room to envelop him, but his pulse raced. This was all new ground, and he recognized the craving for both connection and validation. Dan greeted him with an enthusiastic wave. "Jim! So glad you're here. We've set up a brainstorming session. I want everyone's ideas on the board by the end of the day." Jim nodded, aware of the charge in the air, but he also felt like a newcomer in a fray of experienced collaborators. As they settled in, he took a seat at the large table and watched others present their ideas, some bold, others refined. He felt the stirrings of inspiration, yet the familiar pangs of self-doubt tightened around him like a vice. Could he contribute meaningfully? The session began, and Dan deftly guided the conversation. Ideas flowed: innovations in battery technology, aerodynamic possibilities, and even sustainability concerns. Jim's stomach twisted. At each mention of design, he felt the weight of scrutiny, a sense that his contributions would be scrutinized through the lens of past failures. When it was finally his turn, he couldn't ignore the knot in his throat. The sketches he had brought along felt frail, inadequately developed compared to what others had displayed. Hesitating, he faced the group, forcing himself to articulate his vision. "I believe if we focus on user experience it can make a difference. Sustainable luxury, perhaps." As he spoke, the words began to flow more freely, fueled by the desire to transform. The room shifted, attention trained on him as sketches discussing comfort and sleek form emerged. There was an unease in his chest, a question lingered in his mind: would they see him as just the shadow of whom he used to be, or would they recognize the evolution and capability within him? Jim watched Dan's face closely. There was encouragement there, an unspoken acknowledgement that sparked something inside him. The conversation unfolded effortlessly around him, taking form in ways he hadn't envisioned. His voice grew more confident, ideas blossoming beyond expectations, as if he were carving a path through wilderness, reclaiming his place among experts. After the brainstorming session, Jim despaired, briefly wondering if this fleeting confidence would evaporate, leaving him bereft once more. Yet, as he spoke with Dan later, sharing laughter over shared tastes in music, he realized something vital. This was not merely an opportunity for professional success, it was an opportunity to rewrite his narrative of self-worth. Sitting across from Dan, sharing brief anecdotes, he felt the air between them soften, and the barriers began to dissipate. Jim felt a swell of emerging resilience. He was not merely a part of a team, he was its cornerstone. As the sun set beyond the studio, casting an orange glow across their workspace, Jim understood that he had entered a pivotal moment of his life. It might well be the inception of his true career, and more importantly, the reclamation of his identity. Yet, lingering doubt still waited in the corners of his mind, feeding off fragments of the past. Was he indeed strong enough to redefine himself without the shadows of former failures lurking ever closer? Would he be able to hold on to this emerging worth as they moved deeper into the project? As excitement pulsed once more through him, his thoughts crystallized. This journey was just beginning, but the end destination remained uncertain. The pressing truth loomed larger than ever. Was a moment of courage enough to dismantle a history steeped in uncertainty? The stakes were high, and the challenge ahead daunting. Jim needed to decide if he would step fully into the light or if fear would reel him back into obscurity. The next morning, Jim found himself wide awake at dawn, an unusual energy coursing through him. He spent the night wrestling with thoughts from the previous day, but this time, the nagging questions transformed into a quiet determination. The studio buzzed with promise, and for the first time in years, he felt an inkling of hope instead of dread. As he prepared for another day at the office, he paid special attention to his appearance. The crisp shirt and tailored pants were more than fabric against his skin, they were armor against self-doubt. He grasped the full-length mirror, willing himself to strike an assertive pose. The reflection that stared back was no longer a figure lost in uncertainty, it was a man brimming with potential, teetering on the edge of a breakthrough. Arriving at the studio, Jim was met with the predictable chaos. Teams shuffled around with sketches and prototypes, the air thick with innovation's heady aroma. He inhaled deeply, allowing the excitement to wrap around him like a comforting embrace. With each step into the studio, he could feel the stakes climbing. Today would not merely be another brainstorming session, it was his chance to leap into a new role, one that could redefine him. during the daily team meeting, Dan encouraged everyone to discuss recent developments. Jim's heart raced as he listened, absorbing their insights and critiques. He recognized the familiar echoes of self-doubt attempting to creep in, but a broader resolve pushed back. Each comment he heard only crystallized his choices. If he wanted to claim his space in this innovative environment, he needed to stop being merely an observer. It was time to assert himself. "Jim, do you have anything new to share with us today?" Dan's voice cut through the murmur around the table, direct and expectant. The attention shifted toward him, and for a heartbeat, anxiety clawed at his insides. But instead of retreating, he seized the moment. "I've been thinking," he started, the weight of his own history hanging over him like a pendulum. "What if we framed our design not just around the vehicle's technological capabilities but on the lifestyle it represents? If we show how an EV can enhance everyday living, we can truly tap into a broader market." He saw heads turning, brows raising, and curious eyes sharpening. The conversation rippled with enthusiasm, and Jim found himself riding the wave where his ideas flowed into discussions of practical design elements. As he urged the team to think about detailed storage solutions, user interface design, even materials that whispered luxury, his initial inhibitions faded into the background. He was finding his voice, and it was powerful. Reactions from the team began to reflect a growing acceptance of his contributions. Laughter mingled with excitement as they riffed off his ideas, and for the first time, Jim understood that his presence meant something. He was no longer battling the shadows of his past but thrived in the luminous glow of potential. After the meeting, Jim rushed to Dan's office, a cocktail of adrenaline and hope fueling his steps. "Did you see how they reacted? They actually seemed to embrace what I brought to the table." Dan leaned back, a proud smile decorating his face. "I did. You shifted the dynamics in that room today. I truly believe you're beginning to understand the pulse of what we're trying to accomplish." Jim felt a rush of validation course through him. But just as quickly, another thought invaded his mind: was that light enough to dispel the lingering doubts? Walking out of Dan's office, he caught a glimpse of another colleague, Amy, who had also once battled her own setbacks. Seeing her thrive sparked a new urgency within him, a desire to elevate not just himself but everyone around him. What if collaboration could lead to a deeper realization of his capabilities? What if the team's growth mirrored his own? As he mulled over this idea, he understood that success hinged not just on his performance but on forging connections that inspired others. The stakes had never been higher. The project promised innovation, but so did the possibility of discovering his real identity among a group that had begun to feel like family. The external challenges of their ambitious goal loomed, but it was the internal ones that sparked his imagination. With anticipation swirling in his chest, he pondered as he strolled through the vibrant studio. How could he ensure that his progress didn't stall again? If he would confront the vulnerabilities that had once held him captive, he could reclaim his sense of purpose. But the daunting reality remained: fear often thrived in silence. He needed to choose whether to color his journey with resolve or allow hesitation to creep back in. Just as he decided to reach out to more team members to collaborate, an unexpected alert came through his phone. An announcement flashed across the screen, an invitation that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself. Could this be the key to unlocking a deeper transformation, or would it become another missed opportunity? The invitation pulsed on Jim's screen, demanding his attention like an alarm he couldn't ignore. He felt a heat rush through him. Was this the opportunity he had been searching for? The headline bore a sensational tone, but he could hardly suppress the swirl of excitement coupled with trepidation within. He didn't know if that was the beginning of something monumental or simply another hurdle in his journey. That he walked to his desk, his pulse quickening as he opened the message. It outlined a competition for aspiring automotive designers, where the winner would receive funding to launch their personal project. Not just funding, exposure, visibility, a chance to reveal his vision to the industry. This was not just an opportunity to showcase his idea, it was a chance to reshape his identity. Gazing around the studio, he realized for the first time how much the stakes had changed. He wasn't just another cog in the machine, he was becoming a player in a larger narrative. He had experimented with ideas, but now he needed a clear drafting of his concepts. He needed a cohesive presentation, one that highlighted not just technical details but also the stories behind each feature. Conflicting emotions surged within him. The fear of failure raced alongside the adrenaline of potential success. What if he threw himself into this competition and came up short? What if he made mistakes and didn't represent his team well? The fear of being scrutinized loomed large, but buried beneath it was a resilient hope he refused to ignore. Determined to harness this moment, Jim committed to forming alliances within the studio. It was time to reach out not just for help, but for collective brainstorming. He resolved to initiate informal feedback sessions, gathering insights from Amy and other colleagues about their experiences, design philosophies, and perspectives that could enrich his proposal. "Hey, Amy," he called as he approached her workspace later that afternoon. She was sketching ideas for her own project, the concentration on her face evident. "I just got an invitation to a design competition, and I'd love to get your thoughts on some concepts I'm working on. Would you be open to collaborating?" Her face lit up, a spark of enthusiasm igniting in her eyes. "Absolutely, Jim. I'd be thrilled to help. What do you have in mind?" As they connected, Jim felt a surge of motivation. The exchange evolved into an exciting dialogue, full of explorations and innovations, each idea weaving into the next. They bounced back and forth, their synergy flourishing as they sketched, debated, and pushed each other's boundaries. Afterward, Jim found himself grateful for this partnership. It humanized the competition and transformed it from a solitary endeavor into a shared adventure. Days passed in a flurry of activity. Jim's initial anxiety was replaced with a purpose that fueled his work ethic. Creating prototypes felt like an exhilarating game, filled with transformative moments where his ideas began to coalesce into a tangible form, but with this surge of progress came nagging questions that refused to leave him alone. Was he truly ready for this? Did he possess the skills needed to elevate his ideas? Even as he collaborated, whispers of doubt clawed at the corner of his mind, urging him to question his newfound confidence. Then, an unexpected hurdle emerged, a last-minute change in the competition's requirements. The feedback loop tightened, and Jim's heart dropped. He would need to adapt his entire presentation to meet new criteria that felt more demanding than ever before. The shadows of self-doubt returned, creeping on silent feet, reminding him of all the times he had faltered in the face of pressure. Jim realized he had a choice. He could succumb to the panic rising within him, retreat into the familiar shelter of self-doubt, or he could acknowledge the fear but forge ahead, using it as fuel. The decision stretched before him like a path diverging in a dense forest, fraught with uncertainty. "Okay, Jim," he muttered quietly to himself, steeling his resolve. "You've come too far to back down now." Just as he put pen to paper to rethink his presentation strategy, the door swung open. Dan stepped in, his expression unreadable. "Jim, have you heard the latest regarding the competition? There's been a major change in the panel of judges." The air thickened with an unspoken intensity, pulling Jim's focus sharply. He was about to face something that could tilt the scales of this opportunity forever. Jim's heart raced at Dan's words. The mention of a major change in the panel of judges implied unpredictability, an additional layer of anxiety atop the already mounting stress. The room suffocated him with concentrated expectations and dreams that had crystallized into palpable walls. "What kind of change?" Jim asked, his voice betraying the weariness he felt within. "There are 2 new judges who are absolute frontrunners in the industry, world-renowned designers with records of transforming automobiles. The stakes are higher. This could be an incredible chance," or Dan's voice tapered, leaving the unspoken concern hanging in the air. "Or it could be another humiliation." "I get it." Jim leaned forward, bracing himself against the table. The prospect of being evaluated by figures he had once only aspired to emulate tightened the vice of self-doubt around his chest. "Listen," Dan continued, meeting Jim's gaze with an intensity that demanded his attention, "this is your moment to shine. You're not merely a survivor of this industry, you're a knockout artist ready to step into the ring. Use that." Jim appreciated the encouragement but wrestled with the reality of the self-doubt that persisted within his mind. Easier said than done. What if they don't see it? What if my designs don't resonate? He said, frustration flickering in his voice. It was a battle fought repeatedly between worthiness and rejection, between belief and disbelief. They will see it. They'll see the passion behind your design, Dan replied evenly, challenging every ounce of Jim's impending resignation. But you must own it, every bit of it. This isn't just about presenting a design. It's about presenting a part of you. Though fear still pulsed within him, flickers of determination ignited through Jim's resolve. You think they care about the past? Dan nodded, yes, Jim. They care about the story of how you've gotten to this point. The evolution you've undergone is your strongest asset. Embrace it. The next few days blurred together as Jim threw himself into the competition's requirements. Each late night scribbling in notebooks, chiseling away at the uncertainty layer after layer, felt cathartic. Collaborating with Amy and others wrapped him in a community he had long thought lost. Each sketch transformed into a reflection of tenacity, resilience, the opposition triumphed over darkness. As the deadline loomed closer, Jim fine-tuned his presentation to unveil an overarching narrative. It wasn't just the designs that mattered, it was the context behind each line and curve, a life spent remolding, a past that had sculpted his identity with determination. The journey was no longer solely about the vehicles but about showing the judges what it meant to truly design from the ashes of quiet despair. Finally, on the day of the competition, the bright lights of the auditorium felt disorienting, yet exhilarating. Standing at the forefront, looking at the panel nestled behind the long table, each face was stern, curious, and expectant. Past fears threatened to creep back in, he silenced their whispers. They were not there as ghosts to haunt him but as witnesses to his rebirth. As Jim began his presentation, the tremor in his voice faded, replaced by the confidence of a man reshaped. He spoke passionately about each design, carefully unveiling the story and evolution behind each trait and feature. The room quieted as his narrative unfolded, mapping resilience in sketches that came to life through every word. He could see interest bloom in the judges' eyes. They were not just listening, they were hearing. Questions arose as he completed his presentation, and Jim felt like he was soaring a symphony of ideas exchanged among curious minds. When he concluded and the applause erupted, a wave of relief washed over him. It was not merely applause, it felt like the world acknowledging his hard-fought journey. Despite how lovely everything felt at that moment, he understood the battle wasn't over. With anticipation rippling through him, he awaited feedback, recognizing that this path was an ongoing narrative, a commitment to growth that was far from finished. A few days later, news blared through his phone, a notification that lit up his world in a bright, glorious hue. Jim had not only been selected as a finalist among the competition but had also won a prestigious mentorship position with one of the new judges. The validation he had sought whispered triumphantly in his ears. In a whirlwind, Jim embarked on this next phase, mentorship alongside giants who would sharpen his skills further but more importantly pave the way for him to hone into who he was destined to be. Emboldened yet humble, Jim recognized that this was not a finish line, but rather the starting gun of a new race where every sketch would tell a story not just of automobiles but of a man who climbed the mountains of his doubts and emerged a true automotive legend again. The shadows of the past may have lingered, but they now transformed into guides leading him onward. Jim's journey was finally becoming the masterpiece he always longed to create. With a fire ignited within him, he stood at the threshold of his future. The gears of the automotive industry awaited his return, and this time, he was ready to make every moment count. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm, it really makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending below. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share. You need to subscribe now.